So ever since the dawn of Western philosophy, the primary impulse, or one primary impulse at least, has been to discover the principle of everything. This was the quest that animated the pre-Socratic philosophers, who wondered whether reality might be motion or water or atoms or change or air or something else. And in the modern era, there have arisen various disciplines or methodologies that have promised to be a skeleton key to unlock all the secrets of reality. Clockwork, steam power, electricity, engineering, mathematics, physics, biology, and chemistry have each enjoyed a brief period at the center of an intellectual totalitarianism that tried to colonize all of experience and the world with the categories appropriate for only one discipline. And when we look over the various theories of everything from our culture's recent past, they naturally strike us as antiquated and even quixotic. We ceased understanding human psychology with metaphors drawn from steam power once electricity replaced the steam engine, though we do still contend with the notion that an angry person must sometimes vent to feel better, a false but lingering concept from the age of steam power. And in time, we eventually come to realize that the principles or methodologies that enchant us with the lure of omnicompetence are actually limited in the benefits they confer. Yet, when a new method for everything is first in vogue, it can sometimes seem to offer the illusion of simplifying life with one set of all-encompassing principles. Sometimes the fashionable principles or methodologies are prescriptive, as in the early 20th century when many people assumed we had an ethical mandate to electrify everything in order to solve the world's problems. But often the excitement about a single principle, discipline, or method comes to be descriptive, with thinkers seeking from it a final insight into the ontological foundations of reality itself. For example, in the wake of Newton's discoveries about the laws of motion, numerous European intellectuals proposed that matter, that the world is nothing but matter in motion. And thus we find Thomas Hobbes trying to reduce everything from human feelings to society to motion. Moreover, many political concepts that still linger today, from ways of conceptualizing just revolution to certain variants of social contract theory, are rooted in motion-centric theories of society, going back to the 16th and 17th centuries, which saw human relations as the sum of competing forces reacting against each other like billiard balls, following the inscrutable logic that for every action there must be an equal and opposite reaction. During the 20th century, long after motion had ceased to tempt intellectuals with the aura of omnicompetence, chemistry took center stage, and numerous thinkers proposed that all of reality is nothing but chemical reactions. Meanwhile, those wishing for a more philosophically robust meta-narrative for explaining human motivations and societal movements have been able to choose from Marx, who reduced everything to money, or Nietzsche, who reduced everything to power, or Freud, who reduced everything to sex. Obviously, I'm painting with a very broad brush here and oversimplifying, because I want us to see this reductive pattern that occurs again and again within the philosophical and intellectual discourse. And now, today, a quarter of the way through the 21st century, one might suppose that we have become immune to this type of intellectual hubris, given what we now know about the sheer complexity of the world and the human brain. Yet, Western thought continues to be plagued by the scepter of the pre-Socratics and their quest to find a single principle of everything by which all of reality will be rendered transparent. And the latest contender at the center of a new intellectual imperialism is, of course, computation. understood in the broadest sense to include the language and logic of the digital ecosystem and the algorithms on which it runs. As with the 17th and 18th century obsession with motion, the worldview of computation has both prescriptive and descriptive elements. Prescriptively, the computer-centric worldview leads to utopianism and technology. And that's what we talk about one of the things we talk about in our book here. We have a whole part on technocracy and the utopian ideas that are emerging about reorganizing society around a computer-centric framework. To the mechanical mind, computation promises to clean up the messiness of our world by introducing into human relations the type of precision associated with computer code. And as with the scientism of the 20th century, which promised to bring scientific solutions to every area of experience, there's a growing contingent today who see it as a moral imperative to export the computer's way of thinking to every domain of life, on the hope that we might just be one computation away from solving the world's problems. Or that, in the words of Evgenio Morozov, numbers might eventually reveal some deeper inner truth about who we really are, what we really want, and where we really ought to be. But what if computation is not just prescriptive, showing us how to reach a better world? What if it's actually descriptive, giving us insight into the real nature of reality itself? What if computer code is involved in more than simply running programs on my PC or organizing the vast interconnected network of data in the cloud? What if computation comprises everything there is? What if the proper organizing metaphor for understanding the world and ourselves is not the clock, pump, or steam power, but the binary code that runs everything from computer processors to large language models? What if reality is fundamentally computation and digitality? And I know there's a distinction between those two, but we're not going to get into that. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking that I'm circling the simulation hypothesis, the theory that's been floating around for over 2 decades based on the supposition that everything we take to be life experience is actually part of a computer simulation. Well, yes, I am talking about that, but I'm also talking about much more. The simulation hypothesis is just one among a number of conceptual templates offering a computer-centric ontology and a machine-mediated metaphysics. The variants of the new metaphysics include the notion that anthropology and psychology are just a subset of computation, to the belief that human-computer integration must be sought as a moral imperative, to the idea that there is a virtual heaven of digitality waiting to receive us, to the idea that computers are the new bread of immortality that will confer eternal life on those who submit to the machine mind. In all these variations, we see a new metaphysics rising, and with it, hope of transcendence. And lest it be supposed that in describing these ideas as metaphysical or transcendent, I've inadvertently surrendered ground, let me be clear that the digital ecosystem is not transphysical, let alone metaphysical in any meaningful sense. Rather, it is hyper-industrial and hyper-material. Just as Isaiah pointed out that idols are merely wood and stone, we might point out that to run computer code, even to generate it at any level of complexity, is parasitic on elements of the earth, including rare earth minerals mined from the ground. There is no metaphysics in the machine, but there is a metaphysical hope. There are metaphysical hopes attached to it. And that hope is energizing venture capitalists, computer engineers, and tech executives throughout our nation, and especially around the California Bay Area. Consider one variation of the new metaphysics. All the connected all the connected computers and phones in the world are the nervous systems and sense organs of an entity that can be described as God, a being we can worship, a being we can influence, rather, through prayer and worship. So that is the view of Anthony Lewandowski, famous for being the co-founder of Google's self-driving car program. But consider a slightly different twist on the new metaphysics. Through computer technology, the human race will eventually transcend physicality, while individual people will have the ability to incarnate themselves in various bodies and thus live multiple human lives while still having a singular identity, like a phone that has multiple iterations of itself, while still having this, supposedly having the same identity, because the data is the same, or because all the phones are connected in a single network. Imagine if you could do that with yourself. Imagine if you could duplicate yourself. Imagine if you could create a whole army of yourself that maintained a singular identity. That is the prediction of Ray Kurzweil, an engineer who serves as the principal researcher and AI visionary for Google. Now, we have come to expect that sort of hyper-materialist quasi-transcendence from people like Kurzweil, who wrote books like The Age of Spiritual Machines, while Lewandowski is clearly a fringe character. But let me share another theory from someone more mainstream and influential. Earlier I mentioned the simulation hypothesis, which is probably the best known in the emerging cluster of machine-mediated metaphysics. This view contends that the world of mountains, rivers, cities, and human consciousness is likely a simulation, perhaps one big computer game. Though the idea has a long pedigree in science fiction, mythology, and various philosophical thought experiments, it was first proposed as a serious description of our situation by Nick Bostrom in a 2003 article for Philosophical Quarterly. Since then, it has been advocated by Elon Musk. Now, we are all familiar with how Musk is a key driver of political, technological, and economic policy, but his metaphysics has trickled up into academic philosophy. Prestigious outlets such as the Journal of Consciousness Studies and the Journal of Evolution and Technology have all devoted pages to analyzing the simulation hypothesis that Musk has helped popularize. So yes, he says that our cosmos likely lacks the characteristics of base reality because we're all living in a simulation. He doesn't say that he knows this for sure. It's just probable. How probable? He says there's 1 in a billion chance that we are living in base reality. So very unlikely that we are not living in a simulation. And I'll never forget when I was attending a theological symposium at Gonzaga University, where one of the speakers said, who am I to disagree with someone as smart as Elon when he says he's figured out that we're in a simulation? The basic idea offers a type of quasi-Gnosticism, postulating a higher reality, literally a transcendental realm, compared to which our cosmos is not truly substantial, or in the words of Musk, lacks the characteristics of base reality. And if you want to see my sources for all of this, I have some copies of my talk with all the footnotes, so you can look up some of the interviews where these people have made these statements. Now, interestingly, in one of the articles that talks about this, a journalist for the New Yorker, Tad Friend, he investigated this, and he reported that there have been billionaires that have been paying people to help them get out of the simulation. I wasn't able to find out any more about that tantalizing anecdote. But let's consider another twist. This one goes like this. Humans must merge with machines, and perhaps our consciousness already has without us realizing it. The reason human consciousness must merge with machines is because otherwise AI will likely enslave us. This is a variation of the adage, if you can't beat them, join them. But in this case, joining them is seen as a literal merge, as human consciousness in the collective is joined to the decentralized machine mind in the cloud. This theory comes from none other than Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. Unless you think I'm exaggerating his beliefs, we have this quote here that he was cited by a New Yorker article as saying in an interview in 2016. The merge has begun. A merge is our best scenario. Any aversion without a merge will have conflict. We enslave the AI or it enslaves us. The full-on crazy version of the merge is we get our brains uploaded into the cloud. I love that. We need to level up humans because our descendants will either conquer the galaxy or extinguish consciousness in the universe forever. What a time to be alive. So this is Altman, the man that's behind the company that put out ChatGPT and the leading driver in AI technology. Here, Altman explains merge theory as a potential future event. But in March 2023, he gave a nod to the simulation hypothesis by suggesting that the merge may have already happened. Speaking on the Lex Friedman podcast, he discussed what he called the religion of the simulation and said, he said, I'm certainly willing to believe that consciousness is somehow the fundamental substrate, and we're all just in the dream or the simulation. Altman went on to compare the religion of the simulation to Brahman, a variant of Hinduism which also posits a single principle as the explanation of everything. In suggesting that consciousness is the fundamental substrate for reality, Altman does not mean a kind of immaterialism or subjective idealism along the lines of Bishop Berkeley, or even along the lines of it's more similar to Descartes' hypothetical evil deceiver, causing the illusion of sensory experience. Although in this case, the illusion is being caused by a more advanced race of computer geeks. So think the Matrix, but with no red pills or cells of resistance. Now, in the classic simulation theory of Nick Bostrom and Elon Musk, there is a physical-based reality. It's just unlikely to be us. We are all in a computer game, a simulation by a more advanced race. But what Altman gives voice to is the growing suspicion that maybe there is no material-based reality anywhere. Everything is just digitally mediated consciousness. Which of course there's an incoherence here that of course we don't need to get into. Everything within the digital ecosystem is ultimately dependent on harvesting the elements of the material world, but that's often hidden from sight unless we live near a data center or a rare earth mineral mine, etc. Now, the idea that a digitized version of consciousness could be the ultimate principle behind reality has a certain plausibility in our particular cultural moment. Simulation theory became plausible once we began imagining that computers could explain everything in our world, just as Hobbes' reductionist psychology and politics became plausible after Europeans began imagining that everything might be explicable by the laws of motion. In this new outlook, Marx was wrong to reduce everything to money, Nietzsche was mistaken to reduce everything to power, and Freud was wrong to reduce everything to sex. In the end, everything is actually reducible to the digital ecosystem. Yet what we're observing is more than merely the latest in a long line of theories of everything. The metaphysics of the machine is more than simply a misfiring of the perennial impulse to explain through reduction, though it is certainly that as well. Fundamentally, however, what we are observing is a religious quest, complete with hopes of transcendence. From transhumanism and all its variants to the hope that technology will yield an elixir of life that will confer on us immortality, to the well-documented and increasingly widespread quest to channel spirits using AI. That's something we talk about in the last chapter of our book. We are observing transcendent hopes attached to electronic interfaces and a new spirituality growing up around digitality, digital machinery. Digitality promises to provide transcendence without God and metaphysics without any disruption of the fundamental materialism on which it ultimately depends. We are thus seeing the fulfillment of the dream of Lewis's Screwtape, who wanted a world in which the materialist magician was no longer an anachronism. Now, nothing I've shared is surprising for those who have been following the discourse from the last decade. But what surprised Joshua and I when we were researching our book, Are We All Cyborgs Now?, is just how widespread and influential these ideas have become amongst the engineers, programmers, CEOs, and venture capitalists driving technological innovation and policy. And that helps to explain something that many have puzzled over, which is why there has been such a rush to develop artificial general intelligence as fast as possible, despite so many insiders warning about the risks. There are many political and economic factors that are driving the type of accelerationist approach we are witnessing, ranging from a new type of arms race to the type of incentives that drive large companies. But for many in Silicon Valley, an accelerationist approach to AI is driven by a strong desire to connect to the perceived transcendence of the digital ecosystem. Those working within the small number of AGI labs are being driven by spiritual longings to move as quickly as possible into unknown areas of digital innovation. Consider this report from Tristan Harris from the Center of Humane Technology. It's anecdotal, so you can take it for what it's worth, but I think it's very telling. So I have a friend who I've spoken to informally and really asked him, why are these AI labs racing to build AGI given all the risks? And he wrote back to me about a lot of the conversations that he's had with a small number of people building AGI at these major labs. And he wrote the following: in the end, a lot of the tech people I'm talking to, when I really grill them on it, they retreat into number one, determinism, number two, the inevitable replacement of biological life with digital life, and number three, that being a good thing anyways. And he goes on to say that at its core, it's an emotional desire to meet and speak to the most intelligent entity they've ever met. And they have some eco-religious intuition that they'll somehow be part of it. It's thrilling to start an exciting fire. They feel they will die either way, so they prefer to light it and see what happens. This emotional desire to connect with super intelligent machines is the same impulse that lies behind the various forms of machine metaphysics circulating the philosophical space right now. At root, it is a quest for transcendence, and the hope that transcendence will be found in a cybernetic base reality from which everything else is ultimately derivative. Believing that the machine mind is a portal into what is truly real, it becomes easy to suppose that everything else is mere reflection, or at best, irrelevant epiphenomena that must be overcome to reach what is really real and truly true. That true reality is a digital heaven in which we must come to rest as the final answer to the longings of the unquiet heart. So, thank you for your attention. I'm really wanting to get some helpful feedback, even criticism, so that I can refine this before I publish it. So I want to hear from I wanted to hear from all of you, not just questions, but what your thoughts are, and if you have anything to add to this. Oh, yes.
Hi, I'm Father Ambrose. Thank you for that. Just historically, if this is more of a question or a comment, but have we seen a religious quest in history mixed with so much potential for money and power? Usually there's an ascetic quality of, straying away from the world, renouncing wealth and etc., even in the Socratic times, I suppose. So is this a merging of a religious emotional quest and extreme power, as Nietzsche says, will to power? Have we ever seen something like this, perhaps?
Yes, I think we saw it in America's Gilded Age, where some of the so-called robber barons like Rockefeller and so forth used the theories of social Darwinism to justify and propel their industrialization. Carnegie as well. There was a book that just came out last year that has, I can't remember the name, but it has a whole chapter on how the industrialists of the 19th century were driven by eco-religious intuitions that were fueled by social Darwinism. The other thing I think of is the idea of the invisible hand guy, the Scottish economist.
Smith.
Yeah, but nothing in this scale that we're. So like capitalism was driven by religious ideas about God's providence. So those are the only two things that come to mind that might be parallel, but at nothing at the scale that we're seeing now.
One thing that's striking is these are obviously very, very smart people, highly accomplished at the, height of their profession, lots of money. And all those facts can make someone impervious to being shown that they're wrong or to being seriously challenged. What do you think it would take to change minds and hearts of the people who are leading this movement? And do we know of any cases where that happened? Do we know of cases where someone had bought into this sort of ideology and then emerged from it and older and wiser?
Well, yeah, so as I think through history, people do adapt. People do tend to adapt when there are obvious social and economic consequences. So people thought that before World War I, people thought that industrial warfare would be beneficial because it could mean you could have really quick, indecisive conflicts. And then after World War I, everybody stopped thinking that. So I think it would take some type of widespread disaster or calamity to change these people who are otherwise impervious. I don't know. What do you think?
That's the world I live in. I've been in software and startups for a long time. And one thing that struck me is that this hope for transcendence is definitely shaped by a larger, I think, predominantly pagan. Like all of my colleagues, like when I was working a lot in San Francisco, they were going to Burning Man, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's an intentional pop pagan frame that is also forming them year in and year out. And I think you can look at Burning Man as kind of the nadir of that techno-pagan shape. And so there's also a kind of a perverse eros towards some kind of weird transcendence. And I'm kind of wondering, like, as we've moved out of pure modernism, which was just more about technology and efficiency, now there's this desire to be transcendent, to a kind of mechanical theosis almost, right? Well, what's the shape of that theosis? It's like some chaotic Burning Man, sort of like nascent, unformed intuition that this will be fun, right? But it's also kind of like fatalistic and nihilistic too at its core, which is part of that pagan West Coast Burning Man ethos. that's deeply forming. Like my colleagues, when I spent lots of time in the Valley and San Francisco in particular, they were looking forward to Burning Man. Like I can't tell you how important that dumb little event. It's massive now, and it really kind of represents that particular community trying to fill a spiritual hole with a ritual, a liturgy, some kind of let's say materialized shape of a hope, right? That's like, what are we doing? Like they're all kind of tired of the rush towards building the Facebook of some new thing, right? And being a Google chef and making a lot of money. There's a different desire that shifted, I think, over the last 20 years. And I think you can look at kind of that Burning Man, techno-pagan, chaotic transcendence that they're yearning for. They're trying to stitch it together out of something. And they've left Christianity so far behind that now it's like, in order to convert them, with the exception of guys that are more like self-conscious, like Peter Thiel, who has a different set of challenges. On the whole, that culture is really committed to something very much that looks like the crass paganism of Burning Man and the things that are orbiting that.
And when were you there?
Still sort of there. I've worked remote for a long time, but I've spent many weeks and months in Silicon Valley doing startups at fairly large, prominent. I've done the pitch tours. I've gone to the Heart of the Beast and Andreessen Horowitz, and so it's like, as a Christian, I was fascinated to see like the mythology that the Valley tells about itself. Like if you go, sorry, I don't mean to talk too much, but if you go to the Computer Science Museum in Mountain View, I went to a big conference there when I was CTO of a startup about 7-8 years ago. There's a big mural on the wall when you walk into the Computer Science Museum in Mountain View, and it tells the story of what they call the Fairchildren. There was a company called Fairchild Semiconductor, which was the source of some of the first venture capital money. And from that semi-failed company came Hewlett-Packard, a lot of the early IBM stuff, Dell, like those core folks that took that initial money became Cisco, all the big Stanford spin-off startups that really laid the groundwork for the economic mythology that a few smart people could invest a small amount of money, 90% of them would fail, but the one that would succeed would go 100x, and everybody makes billions of dollars. There's a big tree, and it's like 2 stories tall, and I think that's a founding myth. That's like a Garden of Eden. Like, it's economic efficiency at a different scale than Wall Street. It's a different story, a different kind of risk than Wall Street tells. And I was like, everything clicked in that moment. That's what's that mythology, that story of, we're smart enough to win this constant lottery cycle that they go through. It's like a football season, right? All these investors come in and they're like, okay, who's going to be the cohort of 12 investments of which the 12th is going to prove us right and go 50x? It's the famous 50 times my investment, right? So that is the fundamental economic mythology that the Valley tells about itself. Then you layer on top of that this pagan, transcendence, and it's completely devoid of Christianity. Christianity is so far in the past for that group. The few of us that were Christians that were there would we knew each other and navigated our way through it. But I think it's something like that. You've got this mythology that they've got to attach to. Why are we doing what we're doing? Is money enough to drive us? Somewhat. But there has to be something else, and they're all going to Burning Man.
That's super interesting. To think that grew out of so I've always kind of thought of California as or at least the Bay Area as the characterized by Enlightenment modernism and rationality and I just find it very weird, but I guess it makes sense.
It's also Haight-Ashbury. It's also LSD and tune and drop out.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Chris Turner's book from
No.
Counterculture to Cyberculture?
No.
He shows that a lot of the people in the 60s who were pioneering a lot of these companies were part of the drug counterculture.
Oh yeah.
With drugs being a quest for transcendence that then got migrated over to technology as a way of transcendence.
Yeah, and a lot of the occult stuff, right? Like Crowley and the Novus Ordo Templis and all that. That fed into Jet Propulsion Laboratory. All those guys, a guy named Jack Parsons was good friends with Crowley. A lot of our space program was driven by guys that were on the side doing some pretty dark stuff, right? And so this drive to the stars, which is associated with NASA and JPL, JPL is like jokingly referred to as Jack Parsons' laboratory. Jack Parsons was best friends with Crowley. So there is a relationship between, and it's that's an old story, right? You go back and look at our quest to get to the stars, to throw satellites everywhere, to manufacture our own astrology, right? The stars become the ones that we've put up there, right? The relationship between those things is not accidental. It has deep pagan roots, and that's all over the valley. Yeah.
Tower of Babylon.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question on behalf of the lay people who swim downstream of these philosophical ideas upstream. And that is, I think of the panem et circenses of the Roman Empire, right? The bread and circus. Just give them bread and circus, and that'll keep them sufficiently hooked and sufficiently dependent. As a parish priest, I live downstream with these people who feel such a profound collision in themselves between what they allow themselves to get hooked on in technology. I remember a parishioner saying in confession once, Father, as I was walking out of my children's bedroom, I said, Siri, read a bedtime story.
Oh gosh.
And Siri was instilling the imagination into the children. And so I'd like to ask a question on behalf of the people who are swimming downstream, who maybe feel this inevitability of something they cannot control. They want to stand firm, they want to be resistant, they want to be countercultural, but I think they're genuinely desperate. How would you encourage, on a simple level, Orthodox laypersons who want to say no to the bread and circus, or at least become a more mindful consumer of it, in what feels like a tsunami that is coming down the shores? How would you encourage the family in the nave?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. That's been a huge concern of so many, and when we have two chapters at the end, not the last chapter, but the third to last and second to last, all about boundaries in the home and family, how to protect your attention. Just little things like don't allow computers in the bedroom, have times of the day where everything gets turned off, or have there's, so this sounds a bit corny, but I have a box where I lock my phone, K-Safe. Those of you who have seen The Social Dilemma will remember these boxes, and you put your phone in the box and you turn the timer, and then there's no way to get to it. And you think, well, why do that? Why not just use willpower? Well, some of the research is really interesting. Our devices distract us, not just by the actual distractions when they beep or ring or something, but there's something called information potential. When you're in the presence of a device that might at any time give you information, possibly even something that will spike your dopamine, then that interruption potential, information potential, is itself distracting, even if there's no actual interruption. And so by removing the device from the room that you're in, by locking it in the box, going and putting it out in the trunk of your car while you're going to be reading, those things are helpful because they remove the potential. So if we don't do that, then we become habituated to a condition of continuous partial attention. And there's a switch. Our attention has a switch cost. There's a switch cost. If I'm reading a book and I go and look at my phone, and then I come back, I'm not coming back with my full attention because the actual interruption or the potential for interruptions continues to work on the frontal cortex, even at a subliminal level. So I encourage families to have regimens and routines where they use their devices at certain times, and then they remove the actual potential, as well as the actual interruptions. And then other advice that we give in the book is like putting things in central areas of the house that encourage activities that help towards flourishing. So, like, instead of having the TV in the central room of the house, if you put board games or musical instruments or whatnot. Just little things like that. Something else that many people find helpful is make your digital interface into a single channel device. So you close everything out that you're not actively working on. So if you're writing an email, you close down social media, if you're et cetera, so that you turn your devices into a single channel device so that you can just be focused on what you're using and not have all these distractions from multiple channels bombarding you all at once. So I think people need to do that. I think those types of it's easier to just like take a total rejectionist position, but the families that I've seen who have done that often then when the children are in high school or even after they leave home, they revert to the opposite extreme because they've had no practice with boundaries, no practice with digital discernment, and then they go to the opposite extreme. So I really recommend the families take some type of critical engagement and boundaries, even though in some sense it's easier to just take a total rejectionist approach.
I like your emphasis on family, the idea that this is going to require a communal resistance rather than an individual one. I tell parishioners, maybe 20 years ago, an individual against technology was a fair fight. It's not a fair fight. It's not now you against a 4x6-inch device in your hand. It's you against entire campuses of Google with multi-billion-dollar departmental budgets designed to do one thing. It's no longer a fair fight. So that communal resistance seems...
They research the best ways to harness our attention, because our attention is, you can monetize our attention. So it isn't a fair fight. You need a community all working to this together. If there's a family that doesn't let their children have phones, and then other families do, they like think, oh, why are my parents weird or something? And one of the good things that's coming out now is that families are realizing that they need to be all in this together.
Thank you.
I think there's a misunderstanding here. I love this stuff. I love these nerds. I would want to go to Burning Man. I think that these guys, they have a kind of purity of heart, and they are seeing God. And so I don't understand the scoffing at them or the safetyism about this issue. I welcome this, and I'm so glad that these guys are doing it.
Yeah, so I'm sorry if I came across as scoffing or so forth. I think we can recognize that their desire for transcendence is a good thing,
It's
and
not a
yet,
perverted eros.
Yeah.
I think that is the real eros, and they are.
But you don't think it's a
going up the
misdirection?
ladder Of the symposium that Plato sketched out.
do you think it's a misdirection of the heart's longing for transcendence?
I think that they are trying to figure out the nature of God, and they might just get there. It's going around it a funny way, but the longing, I think, is pure. And I don't think that they are power mad or money mad. They don't care about the power or the money. They're so young it doesn't matter to them. That's not what they're looking for. It really is eros. And I would say that the misunderstanding goes all the way back to the metaphors of the clockmaker, of God has set up the universe as a clockwork mechanism, and now he's standing back and he's letting it run. I have an old clock that my husband runs, and he is on that thing all the time, adjusting it, loving it. It needs so much tweaking. It needs so much. You have to take it apart and oil it, and then it has to be adjusted all the time to make it run. The clockmaker loves that thing and is not separated from his creation. And the clockmaker's love of the thing that he's tweaking. All of these guys who are in tech, they love the machine. And I think it comes back to St. Paul talking about the body, but he specifically says in marriage, trying to understand marriage, that every man loves his own body and cares for it. And there's a like a masculine aspect to it, and the way that men deal with the machines and the things that they're things, and there's an aspect of marriage and uniting to the thing that you love and just always touching it and wanting it to be better. There's a purity there, and I don't know how to explain it except through marriage and eros.
I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. And I have friends that have been in that world and been like completely committed to the Gnostic pagan paradigm, that arrive at orthodoxy and recognize it immediately because it's the perfect inverse of what they were committed to. And there was a failure of that sort of techno-Gnostic pagan side of things to satisfy that thing that they were pursuing. And there comes a point where there is a truth there, and they see certain things and they can see certain structures, but then there's also that world is also a carnival of passions, right? It's not just a quest for, to unify with creation or the machine. There's also a carnal aspect to what, and if you will see it if you go to Burning Man, it will become quickly apparent that it's also a dark carnival, and that there are traps and cul-de-sacs everywhere, and for the most part they get caught in those. There's a pretense to transcendence, but then there's a carnality to it that is romanticized and dressed up as transcendence. But at the end of the day, it's very easy to get trapped in the cycle of passions in that world, and that's also very intentional. I think there's truth in what you're saying, and there is a purity to. I mean, I'm a coder. I still code. I've been coding 25 years. I do feel that flow when I'm working on a problem and I'm coding quickly, and I don't even. It's like Neo. I don't even see the ones and zeros anymore. I love that feeling. There is a kind of flow, and there's a naturalness to it and creativity, and I know I have that same feeling with coders that have been doing this a long time. We love that sense of connection to a problem, the elegance of a problem well solved. But lacking the guardrails that true religion provides, that the gospel provides, it is fraught with peril. And I think what you see at Burning Man and those things is a very dark promise of transcendence. It holds up one thing and then gives you another. And I think that's my experience with my peers, that by and large, lots of drugs, lots of alcohol, lots of addiction. Yes, there is a kind of purity to that, but the traps are everywhere, and it lacks the completeness of the real thing.
I would echo this, in some ways it's just kind of, again, it's Aleister Crowley and Anton LaVey writ large. But at the same time, something I constantly badger my students about. If you don't love Nietzsche and realize that he is looking for something, you're not going to understand him. And I think that this is part of it. Everyone who's serious about trying to find it, that these people are on a quest. Now, some of them will get, like if you go to Burning Man, you're going to get pulled into the mud. Ironically, this year they had lots of rain, and they all got stuck there in the mud. But yeah, I mean, it's a, but at base, people, we're still made in the image and likeness of God, and we can't eradicate it no matter how hard some people try. We're always going to be hoping to find God, but at times we have no idea because we're darkened. So it's, there is always something about us. We're not Calvinists, right?
Yeah,
So-
Chesterton said, every man who knocks on the door of a brothel is looking for God. But it's still a brothel.